intern for this session, Tyler Boutte. He is a graduate of Olathe South and then a graduate of KU and is actually working on his master's in public administration at KU. So glad to have him, and he'll be sitting in on the committee. So thank you, Madam Chair.
Welcome. Good to have you here. Okay, next we'll have introduction of bills. Does anyone have any bill introductions? I do, if there aren't any others. I do have 3 today. I have RS 0051, an educational opportunity tax credit. Are there any objections? Seeing none, that bill is introduced. Then the second one is RS 0258, and that one deals with protecting students in school. Are there any objections? Seeing none, that bill is introduced. And the final one is RS 0499, and this is relating to post-secondary educational institutions, requiring them to review and update accreditation policies. Is there any objection? Seeing none, those are introduced. Are there any others? Okay, very good. We will move on then to our presentation for today. As promised, I know you guys are all tingly with anticipation to dig in to the budget today. So we do have Jennifer Light, who's a fiscal analyst with KLRD, and she is going to delve into that topic for us. Welcome, Ms. Light.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the committee. As previously stated, my name is Jennifer Light, and I am the fiscal analyst from KLRD for the K-12 KSDE budget. I do want to mention really quick before we dive into this that the State Department of Education's budget covers both the State Department, the state aid that goes out, and then it also has the Children's Cabinet within it. So with all of the dollars that I'm using today, it does include Children's Cabinet in the total numbers. So I did not break them out for today because we're just doing a high-level overview. And so if you have questions about Children's Cabinet in specific, we could be happy to talk to you about that later. Yes, Madam Chair.
Well, I have a question out of the gate. So is that just the money that flows through KSDE for the CIF, or is that the entire 54 million CIF budget?
It is not the entire CIF budget. It is the money that flows through KSDE's budget, the money that goes directly out from Children's Cabinet. There is money in CIF that goes through DCF and KDHE. Those both go through those agencies, but there is a full CIF. The CIF is the Children's Initiative Fund, and we do have a full table that breaks out every dollar, which agency has it, and so if you want, we can also provide that document.
Thank you. I just wanted to know if that included DCF and KDHE or just what goes through the education. Thank you for that clarification. Please proceed.
Sure. So we're doing a 10-year high-level overview because in 2017 began the beginning of the, and I'm blanking on the full name of the Education Act currently, but KISA. So that's why everything you see here has got 10 years. It's just to give you a high-level overview of how it's increased as we've moved along through the last basically school finance formula. This is important because the new school finance formula is having the task force meet, and then of course we'll be discussing it in 27 as far as what exactly the legislature wants to do with a new finance formula. So I wanted to start just by doing a quick overview of exactly how much was spent in fiscal year 2024. Overall, in 24 for the KSDE, there was 4.6 billion SGF with 6.7 billion in all funds. As you can see in the lovely circle pie graph, most of that goes out in state aid. When we talk about operating costs for the agency itself, we are talking about a very slim sliver of the pie. Operating expenditures for fiscal year 24 is 20.1 million SGF and then 86.7 million in all funds. And then in state aid, we had 4.5 billion SGF and 6.5 billion in all funds. When I talk about state aid, I am talking about more than just the school finance formula. So the school finance formula, as Matt covered yesterday, has several moving parts to it. There are also additional state aid dollars that go out. The green sheet that's on your table in front of you is mine's white because I didn't grab the right one, but it is from this year's budget summary for the Kansas State Department of Education. It includes the actuals from fiscal year 2024, the agency's request in fiscal year 25. It says LBC recommendation, that's the Special Committee on Legislative Budget, and that is what was introduced in House Bill 2007. Then the agency request for fiscal year 26, and then the same request, or the same House Bill 2007 for 2026. So I do want to draw attention to one line within the State General Fund. There's the MHIT program, or the MHIT program. That was moved from KSDE into KDADS, starting in fiscal year 2025. So the zeros are there, not because we are not funding it, but because it has been moved from this agency to a different agency. So when I talk about state aid, I just want to mention it's all of this combined and not just the school finance formula. Yes, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And if you don't, we will just take questions as we go so that while it's on people's mind. But we do have a couple of questions, Senator Sykes, then Senator Petty.
And thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for being here. So this is great, but a request, you have the legislative budget from that special committee. Is there a way that we could get the governor's budget, like from her bill, as an addendum or another column?
I can make that. I do not have that currently set up.
I figured you wouldn't have it, but if we could get that in the future, that would be.
Yes, I can absolutely get you. It may be that instead of this straight up and down the, we're going to turn it this way, and it's going to be multi-page so that you can still read all the numbers. So it'll be landscape instead of portrait for that one, but I can absolutely get you one that would also have that.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Senator Petty.
Thank you. And Jennifer, when I'm looking at this, you have the legislative budget column for recommendation 2025, then you have the agency request, and then you have the legislative budget recommendation for 2026. I'm trying to, because what caused that change? Because actually those were, I would have expected those to be the same.
Between what the special committee did and what the agency says?
Yeah, but unless they've had a hearing.
So there are a couple of things that have changed. So first of all, when the agency submits their request, the consensus for the fall has not yet occurred. So they are operating off of the approved numbers that we have from the spring consensus. In the fall time, then, the education consensus team meets, and then the process in previous years has been as part of the governor's budget recommendation, they adopt the fall consensus. This year, the special committee on legislative budget heard overviews from KLRD regarding all of the agencies, and as part of the KSD budget, and right before it, we discussed the consensus revenue estimates. Those were adopted by that committee. The recommendations from that committee is what became the bill that is House Bill 2007. So when we say the LBC recommendation, it does include the fall education consensus estimates. It does not include the governor's recommendation for additional special education state aid. So that would, when we put in a governor's column, that will change the numbers within the special education, along with several other areas where the governor has made suggested changes that the special committee from the interim did not.
Thank you for that clarification. As I actually sat on that committee, so I was thinking, okay, what caused that fall revenues? Okay, thanks.
Senator Sykes.
And just to follow up, Jennifer, the Legislative Budgeting Committee, our recommendation was no enhancements, correct?
That is correct. There is, so the special committee on the legislative budget recommended no enhancements or supplements. So there are, for example, the mentor teacher program, you can see in 26 has $2 million or 2.3 million in the agency request, and then in the LBC recommendation, it says 1.3 million. That's because that's an enhancement that they requested, and so that's the difference in the change in those. Additionally, there was some reappropriations lapses, and there is one this year, or there are two within the Department of Education that were lapsed based on the recommendations from the special committee, and that's for the juvenile detention facilities in Flint Hills, and then $23,875 that was in reappropriated money for special education state aid. So there is a slight difference from the special education state aid in that aspect too. And then there was also a discussion about FTEs, and there is a difference in the FTEs and dollars for operating costs because of that in this year's current and then moving into fiscal year 26.
Committee, any other questions at this point? Seeing none, please proceed.
So the reason I printed these documents for you is because up on the screen it gets very tiny to see. I wanted to start by just showing you the overview of the total budget. This is the SGF budget for the Department of Education from fiscal year 2027, and I've pushed it out to what fiscal year 2026 is estimated to be. All the estimates in this document are the special committee's recommended budgets, not the agency's request or the governor's request. It will all get updated with information as we move forward into actuals. So the numbers in fiscal year 25 will finalize for next year, and then in 26 we'll finalize in 25 or 27. So what you can see is that in fiscal year 27, which was the first year of the new finance formula, it was 3.1 billion SGF, and you can see that it's steadily increased to 5 billion as an estimate for fiscal year 2026. Now, what does that SGF mean? If you look at the next slide, you can basically see what the SGF amounts are versus the all funds amounts within the budget. So these are the two different versions for each of these areas that I'm going to have on slides for you. It will have the SGF amount in a line with a linear progression example of what it would just be. And then it will also have this version of the graph where it's the lighter color is the SGF, and then the darker orange fills in the rest of the funds so that the top line is for all funds. So in fiscal year 27, they had all funds of $4.6 billion, and then by 26, we're looking at $6.7 billion. Now, circling back to state aid. So as we talked about, the state aid covers a variety of areas. It also includes the Children's Initiative Fund dollars, and it includes the large chunks of the school finance formula. So in fiscal year 2027, we were at 3.1 billion, and in fiscal year 2026, we're looking at being at 5.6 billion in SGF dollars. Overall, you can see that there was a large jump here in all funds. This is due to a lot of federal funds coming in thanks to the COVID-19 funding. So we are going to talk about that briefly here in a little bit, but I do want to point out that some of this is a COVID-19 funding from the federal government increase, not just that the state legislature has increased dollars dramatically and then over time. I wanted specifically to talk about state foundation aid because that's the base section of what goes out in school finance funding. So when we talk about the school finance formula, the largest chunk of funding goes out as state foundation aid, and that is considered base aid. So I know Matt covered the formulas yesterday. Happy to answer any other questions you have on it. But up through fiscal year 2023, the increases in the base were done via statute. Starting in fiscal year 2024, they went to the CPIU Midwest, the 3-year average from the 3 preceding years. So, and that is how it is going to be ongoing. So for example, in fiscal year 2024, the CPIU increase was well, it wasn't roughly, it was $242 was the increase from the previous year. We started with a base in 23 of $4,846, and in fiscal year, I don't think that's right. I think it's fiscal year 2024, we had the base of, So 23 was $4,846. We moved it in 24 to $5,088, which was an increase per student of $242 per student. And then in fiscal year 2025, we currently have it at $5,373, which is an increase of $290 above last year. And we are estimating for fiscal year 26, $5,611 for the base. So we are moving the base up. It is by the last 3 years, and there just happened in fiscal year 2024, it was an increase by 5.7%. In 25, it's 5%. And I think we're projecting a 4.3% for the last 3 years average for 26. So you can see on here that state foundation aid is also going up over time. Everything is going up. You're not going to see one of my graphs go back down. I'm just going to point that out right now. It's not going backward. Back down is all going up. But it is tracking, if you see the linear progression line, it is tracking on a very similar basis to that. In fiscal year 2027, it was $2.6 billion, and in fiscal year 2026, we estimate state foundation aid going out to students to be $3.9 billion in SGF funds. Oh, no, I'm sorry, that is not SGF funds. That is all funds. So I did want to point something else out here with the state foundation aid. State foundation aid has a variety of sections that go into it. So they have the SGF state foundation aid, the 20 mil property tax fund that goes in, the school district finance fund, and then starting this year, thanks to the special session bill, Senate Bill 1, there is a 20 mils transfer from the SGF that is basically replacing the property tax. When they lowered the property tax, no, reverse that. When they raised the property tax from $42,000 to $75,000, they were wanting to make sure that we were not cutting into the education funding. And so the legislature included a transfer from the state general fund to the 20 mils fund to cover the difference in that.
If I can just comment, I want to make sure that people listening understand, we didn't raise property taxes.
Oh.
We raised the property tax exemption, so.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for that clarification. That's an important word.
We'll get
The
lots of
exemption
emails if we don't clarify that. So thank you, Jennifer. Please proceed.
So moving from state aid, which we just agreed was the majority of the funding for what goes out from the State Department of Education. Operating expenditures, these next two tables are in millions, not billions, and I want to make sure that's clear because people sometimes get confused. M and B, it's really easy to do. So the operating expenditures are only in the millions of dollars. So in fiscal year 2027, we were at $15 million in SGF operating costs, and in fiscal year 2026, we're looking at $20.8 million. So an increase of just over $5 million between the two, between 17 and 2026. All funds, again, there is this large increase in 23. Some of that is, most of that is dealing with the COVID money that was coming in, and when the COVID money was coming in, the agencies indicated that they needed additional staffing to be able to cover, make sure that all of that was flowing out correctly. And so there is increases in operating costs because there was more money flowing through the state agency. And again, I want to go back to this looks like it increased dramatically on this chart in front of us, the one that because of the numbers, but this is in millions. And if you look at the overall 2024 actuals, we are still talking about that little green slice when we talk about operating costs.
We do have a question, Senator Sykes.
And thank you, Jennifer. Sorry, I think we're, well, now maybe 4 slides back. What was the bump in 2019 on that graph?
You know, I looked into that last night, and I don't have it up here on with me, but I'd be happy to get back to it unless Tamara knows.
You can phone a friend and ask Tamara.
So,
Phoning a friend from the audience.
yes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm told it's due to the ACT funding.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions to this point? Seeing none, please proceed.
Okay, so I've mentioned COVID funding several times at this point, and I'm sure you're all curious where we are even at with COVID-19 funding, because a lot of it should have been spent by now. The largest portion of COVID-19 funding within the Education Department is with the ESSER funds, which is the Elementary and Secondary School Emergency Relief Fund. There were several sections to this. In the tables that I'm showing you, if there were several different sections, we're just calling it the one major overfund. So it'd be the ESSER, the Ians and Gear, but it'd be just to be simple. But there are, for example, within ESSER, there's ESSER 1, ESSER 2, ESSER 3, and then an ESSER homeless students. So each of those rolled out at different times and had different amounts of money within it. As you can see, the majority of the money for ESSER funding went out in fiscal year 2023. That is just under $447 million went out in fiscal year 2023. So in total, when when we talk about COVID-19 relief funds, we are talking about $1.5 billion in COVID relief funds across the entirety of every single section of funding that came through in COVID-19. You can see that in fiscal year 2025 and 2026, there is still some money going out. For ESSER funding, we're talking about $134.8 million going out in 25, and then $11.8 million going out in 26. Most of that is due to ESSER 3. The American Rescue Plan Act rolled out ESSER 3, and it has to be spent by fiscal year 2026. And so it's the last of the ESSER funds that need to be spent. There is some that is in ESSER homeless students as well. So that is for ESSER. We still have just over, or just under $150 million going out in ESSER funds in this year and next year. The next slide is every other COVID-19 funding that went out in the large sections. This is Gear and Ian, IDEA, USDA, and funding for the Children's Cabinet. So we picked some fun colors for you to be able to see the differences here. This is in millions as well. So as you can see that the USDA funding mostly went out in the first in fiscal year 20 and 21, with a little bit following up in 22. When we talk about what that is, we are talking about children's nutrition programs. So as part of the CARES Act, and we are talking about I think that's all we're talking about in but it's with children's nutrition funds. So it was for emergency meals and snacks served to eligible participants in the summer food service program, seamless summer option, and in the child and adult care food program in the first couple years of the COVID-19 funding rolling out. As of fiscal year 2025 and 2026, we are down to Children's Cabinet money and Gear and Ian's funding rolling out. So in Gear and Ian's, we're looking at just over $3.9 million in fiscal year 25 and $2.6 million in 26. And then we're talking about $485,000 in Children's Cabinet in 25. So there is still some money to be going out. In fiscal year 2025, in total, we're looking at $139.2 million of that. And then in fiscal year 26, we're looking at $14.4 million. And according to the agency, all of that should all be spent at that point, and we will no longer be having COVID funds roll out to the school districts. So that was a lot of numbers about COVID-19. I'm happy to stand for questions on that.
Senator Shane.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Ms. Light, for presenting. I did have just for clarification, I guess particularly with the ESSER funding. The figure we're looking at is based off of disbursement to local districts, is based off of expenditure from local districts. And I guess what I'm trying to better understand is what's the time difference from when the funds were received by the state, dispersed to the districts, and subsequently spent?
Madam Chair, so I can tell you that the numbers that we're using here are expenditures, and then obviously in 25 and 26, they are estimated expenditures as we roll it out. The available funds in total from ESSER homeless students is just under $1.3 billion. And that from fiscal year 2020 through 24, the expenditures from that, from the school districts, is 1.1 million, or billion with a B. And then again, there's 2.6 million that is already obligated. They haven't, in the table that the KSD does provide as part of their narrative, there is not any funding that has been returned on ESSER funds. So there is still the $144 million that will be going out here in the next 2 years, but there's not been any returned funding on that. But it is based on expenditures is where the dollars that we're talking about are coming from.
And I guess what I'm trying to, I believe, so ESSER 1 and 2, I believe, were dispersed from the federal government by mid-2021, and ESSER 3 came in by mid-2022 or something like that. I'm just trying to track the timing and the progression of when those, again, when those funds were dispersed versus when they were expended, and maybe some of my fellow senators might have insight into that as well, but.
So I can say that all ESSER 1 monies had to be expended by June 30th of 2022. ESSER 2 had to be expended by June 30th of 24, and then ESSER 3 and the ESSER homeless are through the fiscal year 2026. So ESSER 1 was the end of fiscal year 22 for the state, but not the fiscal year, or the federal fiscal year. So, and then ESSER 2 was by the end of state fiscal year 24. And then the last two are by the end of fiscal year 2026.
Committee, other question? Oh, Senator Sykes.
Thank you. Jennifer, on the GEAR and the EAN, so the GEAR is the Governor's Education Emergency Relief, is that correct? And then the EANS was emergency for non-public schools. Do we have a breakdown of those two, like differentiating and showing? And that would be a follow-up. Yeah. I don't expect you to have that right now.
Well, I have a table that KSD has provided that I'd be happy to provide to the entire committee. I give that breaks down EANS and GEAR as far as what was obligated or what was available, the expenditures, and I'd be happy to provide that. That was part of the budget narrative that they did provide this year, and they have for the last several years.
Senator Starnes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for your presentation. And just other than special education, with these charts, is it showing Kansas has fully funded education?
Ms. Light.
The funding for education within the state of Kansas comes from several different places. There is the state obligation, the federal obligation, and then the local obligation. What I can say for certain, based on these charts, is that the state obligation, based on the school finance formulas, went out as it did. Special education, we always talk about how much excess costs we're at. We have not been at the 92%. I'm not going to remember the last year we were at 92%. I'll get back to you with the last year we were at 92%, but for the rest of it, the state aid, it goes out in a formula manner. When we do the consensus estimates, we do consensus estimates twice a year. And so, for example, this year, we did, in the fall, we did the first year of fiscal year 2027's actual estimate. So the fall estimate includes a 2027 estimate. We come back in the spring, we make adjustments to the fiscal year 25, 26, 27. We come back next fall, we'll do 26, 27, 28. We do come back in the spring, we do 26, 27, 28 adjusted, and then in the fall, again, we do the 27. So what I'm saying is by the time we hit the end of the fiscal year that we are currently in, we are really close to the actual dollars that need to go out for the school finance formula. And then again, the other state aid is in there as well. So I do not want to speak as to what federal dollars and local option budgets are supposed to be going towards, but I can say that the consensus estimating group, which is the Division of Budget, KLRD, and the Department of Education, does take and work through this process several times to ensure that we are making, that the school finance formula is covered.
Thank you.
That would be yes. Other questions from the committee? Okay, couple of questions that I have, and give the committee members an opportunity to maybe to think of some other questions, but thank you so much for this information. I think it's very helpful. First question is, have you run any numbers as to whether if the federal government funded their goal, as they like to put it, of 40% of special education, would that then get us to the 92% of excess costs? Have you run any calculations showing that?
Madam Chair, I have not run calculations showing that. I'd be happy to look into it. It's possible that KSD has run something like that, but again, I'd be happy to look into that for you if you want.
I think that would be helpful for the committee to see that breakdown of over time, if the federal government was hitting their goal of 40%, what that would look like. I have seen numbers in the past, but I would like current numbers that show we are actually putting in more than we would need to if they were, but I want the current number, so that would be helpful. Do you have any information, and I apologize for not asking this ahead of time, on unencumbered fund balances?
I do not have any of that with me here. If you would like me to get some information and circle back with you, is there something specific about unencumbered balances that you are?
I would like to see, maybe for the same time period, how the balances, the trend of unencumbered fund balances. And I would especially like to know a little bit more about the textbook fee fund and how that has changed over time. And I apologize, I should have made those requests ahead of time, but I think that would be helpful for the committee to see. And not only if you have any questions, but also requests that they can provide for us. So Senator Shane.
Madam Chair, as an add-on to that, it might be nice to see those numbers compared to changes in the district's overall budget or the budget for that particular fund, so that you have an idea of what proportion the unencumbered cash balance has relative to the overall budget of the school district.
Okay, can you do that? Did you?
So, Madam Chair, if you're wanting me to do this for each of the 285 well, 286. Well, I was trying to think when that is changing. So 286
we're losing
currently,
one here.
285 next year. It will be quite an undertaking and will not be something I can provide within the next week or so for sure. It may be more like a month for that to happen if you want it for each district. I'm happy to, if there's something that we could do, like pick a certain number of districts that you'd like to see. But if you were wanting it for every district, that is a lot of number crunching that we are going to have to do. And happy to do it, just want to set the expectation that it's not going to be something you see here in a week or two.
I would like to have that at some point. In the meantime, can we get just the overall? So
school districts may have unencumbered balances and that's usually when when the legislature is discussing unencumbered balances, it's within the school district's funds. If there is money that is not spent at the state level, if it is not reappropriated, then they can't use it. That's a little simplistic. That is, please do not, oh man. I would have to do some checking as to whether there is something that could be done at a state level, and I'd have to do that in conjunction with the Kansas State Department of Education. So my answer would be is I'd happy to circle back on this and get you discussions as to what is possible and what is not when it comes to unencumbered balances. But
I've seen the numbers before, so let me try to simplify it. Can we get a total amount of unencumbered cash balance? Does that make it any easier?
I will do my best to get you the information. I think I have an idea of what you want. I just, without having looked at the data fully myself, I'm hesitant to say 100% yes
And
without talking to the Department of Education.
I can work with you. I can work with you offline about maybe what we can that would satisfy Senator Shane's request and at least give us some preliminary information to get an idea of what that looks like.
I'm happy to do it. I just want to make sure that we're managing the expectations for you to get the information across the board for what you want.
Understand completely. Committee, any other questions or requests? Senator Gossage.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As I'm looking at these numbers, and of course we see these kind of numbers every year, they're a little bit different track here. I actually think this is easier to understand. But I look at the special education state aid at 601 million, correct? And then I compare that to the line that has from selected federal funds, special education, 106. I'm looking at LBC recommendation for 2025. Oftentimes when we think of things, the other federal, state, federal mandate, we usually see the federal government, for example, our match, it's like 57%. But here, 601 million compared to 106 million is stark. And I just think that this is, I'm very pleased that our chair is asking for that information, because I think that folks out there in the public think that there's a large amount of money that's coming from the federal government to fund our schools, particularly special education. The other thing I want to point out and ask about is the 20 mil for local property tax. We hear a lot from our constituents about, knock on the door, they say, are you going to lower my property tax? And of course, most of that is local. That's schools, that's libraries, it's the county, it's your local city. So we're saying that $843 million in addition to what the state is funding is coming from property tax. So when we see the pie of how much of state funds goes to education, that's only part of the piece. It doesn't include the property tax portion. Is that accurate?
Madam Chair, the 20 mils is part of what we have as the state foundation aid formula.
Okay.
So it is part of, when we talk about state foundation aid, that includes the SGF line item at the top that says state foundation aid. Underneath the other state funds on the green sheet of paper is what I'm referencing, is the first four under other state funds, the 20 mil local property tax, 20 mils transfer from SGF, school district finance fund, and the mineral production fund. Those monies go into the state foundation aid. So when we talk about state foundation aid as a total, when we were talking about that $3 billion, we're talking about including those funds in it. And then the SGF amount is the dollar at the top, which says state foundation aid. So that basically we start with the other, when we're working through the formula for funding purposes, we start with those four down there at the bottom, and then we come back to the SGF to fill in the rest of what we need for the year.
Okay, that would be helpful to have this on here, because it looks like the total for the state foundation aid is X, and then this is in addition. But what you're saying is it's included in that.
Yes, Madam Chair. So this is only one page of the KLRD budget summary. I pulled it because it does have all of the state aid, different dollars going out. On a different page within that, we have I have a table, so on page 16 of what will, and I'm happy to share this with the committee, there is a state foundation aid table which has each of the sections broken out and then the total at the bottom. So it's on a different table that we also share at the same time. I'm happy to share it with this committee as well. Completely hear what you're saying. Sometimes it's just a matter of what can you put on a page.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Committee, other questions or requests? I'm going to ask you, but I see that we have John Hess in the audience. I'm just curious on our green sheet, your white sheet, Jennifer. On the agency request for professional development for 26, they requested 6.2 million, which is, 4 times, maybe 3.5 times. Do you know what the specific reason for that increase in agency request is? And if not, Mr. Hess, I don't know if you know and could help us understand what all that request entailed.
So in fiscal year 2026, the agency requested additional 4.5 million SGF, which would bring the total up to the 6.25 million, and it would fully fund the program. So the program has received appropriations of 1.8 million SGF each year in fiscal year 23, 24, and 25. According to statute, we're going to get into some legalese here. The professional development state aid should be the lesser of 0.5% of a school district's general fund or 50% of actual expenditures for an approved professional development program. And so professional development state aid is to promote the continual professional development of all certified personnel serving in the K-12 schools. And so the agency's request includes fully funding the professional development section. The 1.8 is not fully funded that section for the last several years. And I'm happy to stand aside and let John answer more questions if.
Mr. Hess, do you have anything to add, or is that covers it? Okay, all right. Thank you for that. I had not seen that before, so that's very helpful. Committee, anything else? Senator Sykes.
I don't have it on this, but I don't know if this is appropriate time. So we have our agenda for next week, and I noticed that there's a hearing. Do we have updated information yet?
Thank you for that question. And we'll go ahead and end this part if there are no other questions. Thank you, Ms. Light, for that. Yes, Senator Sykes, we are going to hear one of the bills that was introduced today. We just don't have the SB number. As soon as it's read in, we will get that for you. Yes, thank you for the question. Committee, anything else? We will be meeting Monday. Dr. Cynthia Lane, who is the Executive Director for the Blueprint for Literacy, will be here giving us an update on that program. I know the governor mentioned it. There's a lot of talk about it, so I want this committee to be read in on what that is and the status of that initiative. So we will be meeting on Monday. Any other normal time? Any other questions or business before the committee? Seeing none, we are adjourned.